Greetings, and welcome to the next installment of the Babylon 5 reactions slash commentaries, but there's no slashing going on because apparently there are laws about that sort of thing. Today we will be discussing and reacting to and commenting upon Signs and Portents, a first season episode that is remarkably important to the 5-year arc in a way that is oddly tied into my love of shooting pool. Parenthetical, you don't play pool, you shoot pool. If you walk into a bar and you want to play some pool, they will take you for everything you have. I love shooting pool, but I'm not very good at it. But those of you who do share that affection for it know that the game begins by taking all the balls on the table, you push them all together in a tight mass, you rack them to make it even tighter, and then the cue ball is fired into the series of balls. And this is called the break shot, as all the balls scatter in different directions, and you then deal with each ball individually. This is called the break shot. And there's a break shot in this story that takes all of our characters and does the same thing with them. You'll know it when it happens. I should mention that I'm also wearing a different hat today than last time because I am a man of many hats. And I'm very proud of that. So with that being said, and I'll be telling some things about the writing of this story and the overall arc of Babylon 5 that I've never talked about before, as far as I know of anyway. After a certain age, it all begins to blur, you know what I'm saying? So with that being said, we will now cue it up, as we have with the break shot. Our countdown begins in 3, 2, 1, press. Lovely establishing shot, sense of scale, and I love the sense of motion and the sense of the station moving behind it. Nice and slow. I must confess, I hate mornings. I am a night person. I live for the night. I die for the night. And getting up is the hardest thing in the world for me. I don't like it. I don't care for it. Mark Twain just stayed in bed all day and wrote in bed. And often would complain about the fact that, a white handkerchief in white sheets can never be found. He's not wrong. So the first season in particular, I gave the characters parts of my own personality, including Ivanova's disdain for morning and waking up with the groggies. Her attitude started out more Russian in the beginning, but over time, as I gave Claudia more of a sense of humor for Ivanova to play, it didn't work the same way. This thing about it's always dark in space is, again, very Russian, but it works against her kind of humor, which is a little bit more energetic, a little more zany at times. So over the course of the show, I kind of pulled back a little bit on that sense of humor. I've never been sure about the fact that our pilots would always be doing this and that and this and that in order to see what they were, being attacked by, because they would have a heads-up display both in the helmet and on the screen. But despite telling people that, they kept doing it repeatedly, and after a while, you kind of give up on it. It just looks weird, in my view. Everything about the station in the intros is talked about in the past tense because, again, we know from the end of the show that this is actually a history of the Babylon 5 stations made after the fact. One season per year. So from their point of view, looking back at this, it was all past tense. Hence, it was the last of the Babylon stations. As viewers watching this 100 years further down the road would know, oh, of course, that's our past. It's our future, but their past. Are you following this? The opening logo, I actually described in great detail to Foundation Imaging. I said I want to see a laser going across the screen, then the 5 tilts in and is stamped against that. When I first saw it, I was so excited because there was Babylon 5 after all those years being talked about and marketed and said no to, and by golly, there was the actual logo. It's the small things in life that make me happy. Gerbils, popcorn, are created by credit. The same ship dock so many times. I love that this virtual shot. We were one of the very first shows to do these kinds of, shot extensions to make the show look bigger than it actually was. I don't know why we didn't go back to that shot more often. It's a beautiful shot. Ed Wasser was originally our script reader on Babylon 5. When actors came in to audition, he would be in the room with us to be the person opposite them off camera. And to reward him for his work, we gave him the one shot in The Gathering. But the more I worked with him, I kept thinking, he could use something better than that. And sure enough, when this came along, I thought he'd be perfect for Morden, and he auditioned, and he got it. I wanted to set up in the course of the first season that the Raiders were going to be our big bad for the entire run of the show. And then eventually obliterate them. Because that reinforces the notion that in this show anything can happen. Don't count on what you think you know the show is meant to do. Same way we wiped out entire races in the course of the show. Things happen here that are irrevocable and will not be changed back again. One reason I like the jackets and the uniforms is they can take them off. You can get layers. This isn't like most science fiction shows where there's just like one tunic or one pullover. There's a jacket, there's a shirt beneath it. They can open up the shirt, they can relax, which is what military people do. They walk around in tunics all the time. Here we begin seeing the material presented in Sky Full of Stars being examined and having suspicions about Delenn. And he is not wrong in having those suspicions. The Minbari are kind of the power behind the throne. A shot like this, which is one long moving shot, he has to be flawless in his delivery because he goes around that entire room at least once, possibly twice. And you're trying to not trip over it, over the wires and the cables, deliver the lines in exactly on your mark, perfectly focused with the camera. And Michael was always flawless in this stuff. He really was. And they had a good relationship on camera. Off camera, Jerry often would wind up Michael for various reasons of his own. But on camera, they had a great relationship. Later on, you will see a Centauri prophet. It's not in this episode, but down the road. Give him 3 prophecies to avoid the darkness ahead of him. One is, you must save the eye that does not see. And this is that eye. He should have done this in a different way. He should not have trusted Kiro. He shouldn't have handed it over in that fashion. He shouldn't have trusted that they would not try and take the throne for themselves or make a bad deal. He himself should have been the one to do this and bring it back, because then the Shadows never would have gotten their hands on it and never have used it to influence him. He did not save the eye that does not see.
My job is to find things, objects, people, you name it. Now I've got my payment. I'll be on my way.
Payment indeed. My government paid enough to buy a small planet. But I would very much like to know how you got your hands on this.
No, you wouldn't.
We tended not to show the eye a lot because it wasn't quite as dramatic as it might have been on camera. It just sort of looked like a thing. This character, Morden, is the break shot that I mentioned. He is the one who now will begin to scatter the characters into their own individual arcs. This is the opening shot of the 5-year arc when he comes in. I love this scene so much. It is emblematic in so many ways of the real problem between the Narn and the Centauri, is that they're so busy fighting each other that they miss the important stuff.
I hear there is a famine on your world's southern frontier. My condolences.
And my condolence is given with a smile. It just everything about this is just so dead on with these two actors.
All armed foe. Precisely. Though I have noticed that your own people have
Again, this goes back to what I mentioned in Signs in Sky Full of Stars, is I like having two characters, or in this case 2.5, in a small space, just arguing with each other. That comes from the theatrical background. This guy's just trying not to be involved. He's like looking back at, well, I don't know what's going on. Just let me out of this.
One more comment like that, Polari, and you will become part of the excess population. Threat! Yes, threat! Now you can go to hell.
And so involved in themselves and their feud that they miss the point entirely, which is to get in the frickin' elevator.
only assumed that once they were finished with Mutare and like my memory being taken aboard their cruise, put me back in my ship and let me go. And you're sure it was the Navy song?
I had to do a lot of backfilling of exposition because I wasn't sure really, how much the audience would recall from the prior episodes. Again, we were doing something I hadn't done before in terms of a multi-season, multi-episode arc. Until this time, most science fiction shows had at most a two-parter. So I thought, okay, let me overcompensate if I have to, and just be sure to take care that the audience is given all the information every episode needed to understand what happens in that episode in case they had missed the previous one. And that meant it's often very exposition heavy. There's the break shot. Slams into the characters, and they begin spinning off in their own direction, starting with G'Kar.
But in order to see someone of your prominence, I had to get a recommendation.
For me, plot and stories is to illuminate character. And starting with this episode in particular, we really begin to see the illumination of these characters. And we portrayed G'Kar as this bad guy with a lighter tone to it at times. But he had no more ambition than to see his people liberated. That's where it ends.
As you say.
I should mention also that where some of the questions in Babylon 5 come from is a psychological game called the Synanon game. It was used to deal with alcoholics and drug addicts. The way the Synanon game works, often done in a encounter group, is to ask the same question over and over again, but not allow the same response. So he's asking the same question over and over again, looking for a different response. In a Synanon game, you might say, if I was in it, who are you? I'm Joe. Who are you? I'm a writer. Who are you? I'm the son of Charles Nevlin. Who are you? And the point of the Synanon game is that the deeper you go with those questions being asked over and over again, not being allowed to give the same answer twice, is it forces you into a deeper self-examination. And that's what is happening here. It happens all the way through to Comes the Inquisitor and other episodes. The same question is asked in order to get at a deeper truth, a deeper reality, a deeper characterization of these people. So that is why those questions here and later on recur repeatedly. Holy crap, that's a whole lot of hair. I must confess, there are times when I look back at the hair situation and wonder what exactly I was thinking. Because it's such a obstacle to some people watching the show.
Quite a strain if you are not used to such foolishness.
I thought that the female Centauri eschewed that entirely and just, said, we don't even need him. We don't have to prove ourselves in this superficial and shallow fashion. I, the two shot of them like this. It all came out of a practical joke on The Gathering. And Peter, they're going to cut Peter's hair to the right length, and he said he liked it the way it is to me. And as a joke, I didn't know that, and he said it would help him in his portrayal. So I let him keep it. And every Centauri afterward had to have that hair. And there are times I'm not sure about it. I mean, creatively, yeah, I get it. It does show the difference in status, but it was so hard to make those wigs work. They would often begin to part in places. They would droop. And a Centaur with a drooping crest is just... I mean, there are pills that will help that, but it's not good. And here you can see the light coming through on Lord Kiro's hair, and it just... like... That's why I always hated shooting against light backgrounds, because light backgrounds illuminate the gaps in the wig.
Then you don't believe her vision. She's been wrong before. On my first birthday, she said that someday I would be killed by...
I love Garrett Graham in Phantom of the Paradise, my favorite films of all time. If you haven't seen it, by all means give it a watch.
Where is the eye? Safe. I would like to see it. Well, actually, I was told that my family has been waiting for over 100 years for the eye.
Here he buckles under to the pressure
Our house.
to give Kiro, the eye.
Honor. Now I must play Leslie. Searching for so long, I would like to spend some time with it before turning it over.
He let himself get bamboozled. Had he not let Kiro take the eye, brought it back in the proper way, there'd be less of a bargaining tool.
6 to 1. Have located target. Commencing surveillance.
6-1, slight prisoner reference.
What is the purpose of your question, Mr. Morgan?
Here we see Delenn building up the Chrysalis device. And I love the fact that we're building this over the course of the entire season and no one paid any attention to it. They thought it was like a game or something. But then, of course, we see at the end how it all comes together, which is, of course, how I wrote the show. Little tiny pieces put here and there and here and there. And gradually they come together into a much larger architecture, and you can see the purpose of it. The Grey Council had symbols implanted in their foreheads to show who they were, but even more importantly, they were like detectors for the shadows, like motion detectors of shadows. When she covers it up, it stops working, and the shadow goes away. But it's a way of letting them know if the shadows have come back. Not literally a motion detector. It looks for the frequencies because the human eye can only scan on so many levels. And as Sheridan discovered himself later on, they're only visible on certain frequencies, and that device is constantly scanning all the frequencies for the shadows. And now she knows because she has seen it. That's what that symbol means, both as Grey Council and as a shadow detector, if you will. Yeah, it could be a lot more impressive than that, I suppose. Kmart, $12.
Knows that it's here? No one. Except the man who brought it to you.
I think it was like part of a gyroscope or something at one point. It got covered with jewels.
We'll bring it back just as quietly. It'd be better for the government to declare that they found it back home, rather than to had to buy it from some outsider. Ambassador, you must know that things are changing. I hear a few things. Every day people grow unhappier with her.
As much as this scene and this information is needed for the plot, I really wasn't that happy with having to show or describe the Centauri mechanisms of power back home where you have no vested interest in them. We hadn't met more than just a couple of people from there. Later on, it feels more naturalistic. It seems more organic to have them reference the region and others once they've been established. But talking about court intrigue back home when you haven't seen the court, it felt kind of empty to me. So when he says he wants to overthrow and become king himself or emperor himself, we don't know who the current emperor is, so there's no real shock value to that. No sense of, don't do that.
These are no longer the good old days.
And here's Lando's hypocrisy. He keeps telling Kiro these are not the good old days. But that's all Londo really longs for, is the good old days.
Good night.
In a way, it's his bitterness coming through it. It's not so much tactical as a sense of loss. And when there's something you can't reach for yourself, it's easy to become bitter about it and angry about it. You suppress it, you push it down, you hide it. But that bitterness is there and the anger is there. That makes him vulnerable when Morden shows up. Him saying, the good old days are gone is him trying to say to Kiro, look, I've given up on all this. You may as well give up on all this. The prophetess here does say later on that this future is one of many possible futures. It wasn't set in stone. It wasn't necessarily, 100% guaranteed that would happen. And she says it herself as well. So there was always room to play with that if there was ever a change. And as we move forward, that became the case.
Hey, where are they coming from? I don't know. Time to target. 20 minutes. Battle station. Thrusters to maximum. We're trying to beat him to the jump gate. Earth transport vessel Achilles to all ships in Red Epsilon. This is Earth transport vessel Achilles.
I think that was in shadow so much because we weren't quite done with the tricking out the shuttle yet. So we had to kind of keep it dark.
Stand by, Achilles. Help's on the way. Lieutenant Commander, you're clear to launch.
Confirmed. You heard the man, Delta Wing. Hit it.
You'll notice that Ivanova's command bar, her staff bar that she wears over here, is broken in the middle with two colors. That both says that it's a interim rank, not commander, but lieutenant commander, one rank below that. Also, it's stipulated she is the liaison between the commander and the crew. She is, the amanuensis, if you will.
Estimate 2 hours until we can reload the Cobra base. Keep them busy once they arrive. We'll take care of Babylon 5 from this.
This was a murder short moment. It just felt too pat, too flat. That's why, much as I enjoy looking at these, it's also horrifying because there is not a frame of film or one line of dialogue that I would not go back and change. I love the War Launch. I love that we brought color into the show. Until B5, most of these shows science fiction shows were done very much in subdued colors, if at all, or just white ships. We wanted to bring in lots of color. This is the one confrontation he wants to avoid because the Vorlons would know what he is also, as well as Delenn knowing Kosh would know, and he's trying to avoid that. He's trying to avoid giving away what their agenda is. The 1950s is kind of a shot with a noir look to it. You'll notice that the jump gate looks different colors depending on which side you're on as you go through it. Because of the red shift, we incorporated red shift into the technology.
Any further transmissions from the Achilles?
Confirmed. Still reading her Delta meter.
Alright, let's hope our confidence is good. Delta 7 and 8, stay behind and watch the gate. If the Raiders manage to double back and get past us, link in. I want to know how the hell they're getting in and out of here so fast.
Will do.
Other spinning of the star Furies that corresponds to Newtonian physics. It looks better than it would have looked had they just peeled off the way most science fiction shows do. It's more realistic, and being more realistic makes it look actually more interesting, I think.
Notified Centauri Prime of your expected arrival. There'll be a ship waiting to escort you home. You'll have
All I can see
step of the way.
is the light through the hair.
See you in a few moments.
And now we have round 2 of the Synanon game. What do you want?
Ambassador, I was just on my way to see you.
Who are you? Why are you here? These are all parts of that process of the Synanon game. That's why NaNON.
You are a lunatic. Go away. Pester someone else.
It always had this great gritted energy about him that belied the darkness of his character.
I have to be. I'm not allowed to leave here until you've answered my question. What do you want?
This is a silly conversation.
Yes, it is.
But what do you want?
To be left
Repeated.
alone.
Okay, that's the first answer.
Is that it? Is that really all, Ambassador?
And now again, the drilling down begins. And now we see the rage he was hiding in the conversation with Lord Kiro.
I want my people to reclaim their
The part of it that has not yet given up, or that has given up and is angry about it.
off their hand again and command the stars. I want a rebirth of glory, a renaissance of power. I want to stop running through my life.
Some of this dialogue is I was also a beat poetry fan, and there's a certain scansion that Louis Ferlinghetti would use in his writing, a little bit which pops into here.
I want it all back, the way that it was. Does that answer your question?
And now Morden has what he needs. He has a person who is vulnerable, a person with grand ambitions, who lets his anger and resentment and desire for power get in the way of logic. He's found the person he needs.
Up until now, the Raiders have been hitting
Why is Babylon 5 upside down in that shot?
full sector further away.
I mean, granted, there is no up and down in space, but I never noticed before that the schematic in that shot of B5 is upside down, whereas everywhere else it's the correct orientation for tactical reasons.
I want the eye. The Lord you're talking about. No more lies.
And this is where he should have made his stand. This is where he should have been more prepared and more cautious, less trusting, and not allowed Kiro and the rest to take the eye, even if it meant risking his own life. Instead, he was blinded by power, blinded by loyalty to Kiro that he should have known better than to exercise.
I have the cargo information.
He made all the wrong choices in this and ended up losing the eye to Kiro and having the shadows save the eye.
Hydroponic supplies, tools, atmospheric testing materials. There's nothing here that would bring a high price on the black market. Nothing worth the effort of stealing.
Then why the attack?
Babylon Control to Delta Wing. Do you copy, Delta Wing?
Confirm that on control.
What's your status?
We just got word the Raiders have broken off the attack. We're flying into
I believe that the tech we saw a moment ago was actually one of our stand-ins on the show. I like to try and promote up among the ranks, so people would go from stand-in to having a line of dialogue to moving up. The way that we moved up Ed Wasser from being a script reader to having a small part to having a larger role. It's important to reward people for their efforts. Anyway, the Corwin also made his way up over time. Corwin named for Norman Corwin, who was my mentor in college and afterward.
10 minutes, I might be here.
Tell Garibaldi to stand by with Alpha Flight. I'm heading for Bay 12. Ambassador, the ship of yours that's about to depart.
Commander, this is not a good time.
I have to warn you, we received information that...
Commander, look out!
It looked so staged. Ah, my.
If anybody tries to block the docking bay, I'll use the ship's thrusters and burn my way through. Understood?
Understood. We won't try to stop you.
I'd always heard you were a smart man, Sinclair. Now move. Get him! Get him now! What are you doing? You can't just let him go.
Garibaldi, the Centauri liner will be coming out of the docking bay in about 5 minutes. Target engines only. I want her disabled, not destroyed. We'll program the jump cage to reject the ship's ID code. We'll let it outside to keep it with damage to the
I love Michael's attitude, the seriousness of this. You always felt the stakes that were involved when there was in a scene. The hardest thing to work out is a tactical voice and a command voice, and he had that.
Inventory line is out and trying to activate tailgate sequence.
All right, Mr. Garibaldi, move in. Hit him and reel him in.
By all rights, the stars outside command and control should have been rotating. We tried at one time to have a massive rotating screen out there that would turn and give us a sense of space and motion. But no matter what we did, it made noise. You'd put all the grease on you want, but it's going to squeak. So we had to reconcile ourselves with a star curtain, what they're called, that would let us have something out there. There were, I think, one or two shots where we actually did CG in the background, but for the most part, it was just one of our gaps in logic, or glap in logic. A gap in logic or a glap in logic.
Moving in attack formation. Weapon systems locked.
Here you see, Corwin down at the bottom. Later it moves up one level to the next section on the other side. Eventually he'll end up the main dog, main guy in charge. The battle wagon was designed in a way that would allow it to have immediate launches. Even with B5, they have to get the ships prepped and drop them. Here, the ships are already ready to go and on the outside. So the moment that they come in through the attachment and jump into the cockpit, they're ready to go. The danger is I think a little bit exaggerated because the Raiders are not. You don't have the power level of a entire civilization backing them up. It's one ship. Yeah, a bunch of individual fighters, but their actions of attacking the station are questionable. Their desire is to get the heck out of there. And engaging the station seems to me like the logic is not as strong as I would like it to be. And now we have him sensing, or the shadows around him who are always with him, saying, we're not alone. When you realize that he's not alone in these shots later on, when we see the shadows with him, you begin to realize that Kosh is basically facing at least 2 shadows, possibly 4. When he's saying they're not for you, he isn't talking to Morden. We had the very first conflict between them, and now the cat's out of the bag. They're actually probably losing more in destroyed ships than they would have gotten from 5 of the eyes. But let's not dwell on how stupid the writer can be at times.
Between 2 and 5 kilometers spread.
I'll have to take it offline for a minute. Do it.
I like the fact that as when new orders are being given to reconfigure weaponry, it isn't just done immediately. There is a process. These things take time. You have to reconfigure things and take them offline, then put them back online again. You always felt that there was actual logic to what they were doing. God knows the writer didn't have any, so the characters had to have some logic of their own.
Confirm Babylon control.
These were some of the best Star Fury shots overall that we had in this episode in general. They give you a real sense of physicality, of weight, of how they worked and operated. not just individually, but as groups as well. This is one of the very first significant battles we had around the station. And when you see when they're all working in the concert, how deadly a force it can actually be. I remember I was writing this thing thinking, how is this going to look when we actually get the CG on this? And being so blown away by it and so much impressed by the sense of scale of this thing.
Confirmed.
And all the thrusters are firing the appropriate way to get them to move properly.
Delta Leader, Babylon Control, they're opening a jump point. Repeat, they're opening a jump point. Go to maximum thrust.
Negative, Delta Leader. Abandon pursuit. You might get caught in the backwash. We've got their fighters, don't risk it.
Commander,
That's an order, Delta Leader.
And you want to be starting into a jump point, and have a close on you. This can ruin your entire day.
Computer, liberator ships destroyed, 4 damaged and captured. Interrogating the prisoners now. Station took some minor damage. We've got maintenance bots working on it. And of the major. It seems that Asher Kosh's encounter suit was damaged, but he's not telling how. Just after some equipment was fixed.
So we know that Kosh's suit was damaged. And given that they're a pretty advanced society, the question becomes, okay, what could do that? And logically, anyone watching the show would say, well, there was just Morden in the room. How did that suit get damaged? What could have been done? By him, nothing. By those with him, enough. But he was able to fight them off.
It helps. It looks like we hit the Raiders bad. Maybe bad enough so that we won't be seeing them again. They still got their main vessel.
Won't be seeing the Raiders again, which is correct for the most part. That danger is now gone. So now the question becomes, okay, well, they're not the big bad. Who is the big bad? We met them this episode.
The ship the Raiders captured was registered in your name, Lady Rivera. They were after something in your possession. I'd like to know what it was doing here, and why it wasn't declared on the cargo manifest.
It's a very long story, Commander.
My time's your time.
He can be charming when he wanted to be. It does feel false. Something about this scene, even when I wrote it, it just felt like, again, Murder, She Wrote, which I just come off doing to do this.
Put you in charge. I don't care how much leverage you think the eye gives you. You think they're gonna follow you just like that? Not a chance.
But I helped you. The transport times.
And we're grateful. This ship, big enough to make its own jump point, cost us nearly every credit we've stolen over the last 5 years. With the ransom we can get for this, we can buy 1, maybe even 2 more.
Yeah, dream on.
Made it worth taking the risk. Not your You're gonna send a message to Centauri Prime. They've met our demands for the eye. They won't consider paying your ransom until
You know, when
still alive.
you make a mistake or you do something dumb, at least
Look on the bright side.
there isn't a recording of it somewhere
Always the new emperor.
to embarrass you, or at least make you remember how dumb you were.
And once back,
And some of these scenes, some of them I love a lot. Some I really love a lot of them.
find out.
And some of them I look at and I go, this is another one of those. I was still cutting my teeth in many ways. Our first introduction of the shadow vessels. And I remember the audience reaction when I saw the post the next day after it aired was, what the hell was that? And you just you don't have to see a small part. You just have to see the legs of the thing to know this is something that ain't right. And with one shot, it took out this massive battle wagon.
Well enough to travel, my lady.
Have responsibilities I must attend to.
Given that it took the entire B5 station to hold this thing off, and this beast of a ship took it out in one shot, That's his immense power.
Even if they don't buy it back, you guys will be astronaut.
I'll do anything I can.
But I'm afraid I'm beyond anything short of a miracle. Good night, Lady Theater. See to shipping me.
And here he is again, resigned. This is a guy, Londo, who has just kind of given up. He drinks and he gambles and he womanizes to hide himself, from what he feels he has become.
Whoever it is, go away. All right.
And even Londo's costume has layers and layers to it. The jacket, the vest, the shirt, the tie.
You, go away. It's late. I'm in no mood for your games.
I'm leaving soon. I got what I came for. But before I go,
It's also a bit of a stretch that this lovely box would have survived a ship being destroyed around it. But the author needed it to survive.
How?
Good question. How? I don't know.
Where did you go, eh? Let me buy you a dream. Let me buy you an entire fleet of dreams. How can I ever
Well, the few times Londo seems truly happy.
we will find you, Ambassador. We will find you.
And this little trinket you have, it looks like it came out of a dime store. I wanted to show a bathroom in space because the Trek shows never did. Not just a bathroom, a door, but to see it actually being in use, seeing them zipping up afterward, see them have the hand sanitizer. I was very pleased with myself for showing the first bathroom in space. And of course, they'd be less concerned about gender issues at that time, so you'd have, men and women sharing the same facilities, which you see in Europe quite a bit. The later scenes where we have the Pakmara bathroom shown was just gross beyond words. It was another story. Seeing again that the Minbari are pulling the strings and that he is not necessarily wrong to be concerned about this.
They were the first to sign on to support Babylon 5 on the condition that they had approval of who was assigned to run this place. They wanted you.
Which of course would raise even more suspicion. Now you understand more why those two characters came after him in Sky Full of Stars. Because they probably would have known that the Minbari wanted him, which raises the question, is he a fifth columnist? Is he actually working for the Minbari? Is this whole thing them trying to get control of an Earth operation, which is the Babylon stations? Wheels within wheels within wheels.
But the vision, Commander. The vision is still there. It's not an easy thing. But I can let you see. If you will trust me.
And trying to give a sense of a larger story being told. Because again, science fiction being very episodic back then, I wanted to say, no, there's paths and journeys these characters are on that may or may not happen. So this would be a shot we did see of B5 being destroyed. But we don't know necessarily what that leads to, or what leads up to that, I should say.
Is it a vision of what will be or what might be?
So actually, in this case, it actually is a vision of what would be. His flash forward in another episode, which we'll get to momentarily, was the interim fate that could have been different circumstances leading up to that moment. But there you are in the first season, seeing one of the last shots of Sleeping in Light. Slightly condensed, it didn't blow up as it was leaving, but one last ship did leave. And that is Signs and Portents. I'll be back in about a week or so with more commentaries. Thank you for joining us on this one. This was the episode that really changed the course of Babylon 5. This was the show that said to the audience, we've been teasing you a bit about, you know, 5-year arc and big stories. Well, this is where we start to deliver on that. This is the break shot that scatters the characters and now sets into motion everything that follows in the rest of the show. Thank you for being here. I will see you again soon.